Thank you for watching the Andy's Randomness channel. Please feel free to like and subscribe and to follow Andy's Randomness on Twitter and Instagram at Andy's Randomness. Okay, hello there everyone. Today is October 29th, 2022. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the 10-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy. Now, today is Saturday, of course, but I do remember that the storm did impact the New York Tri State Area on Monday, October 29th. And what I specifically remember about that week in 2012, and I'll even go as far as my birthday in 2012 to go into the specifics. But I want to mention that at the time, that was my senior year of high school at Gersh Academy. So I remembered the last day of school that I attended at the old building on Union Turnpike at the time, before they moved to West Hempstead. I remembered my last day of school was October 26th. That was the last time I saw my best friend from high school, Al, who has a YouTube channel. I'll give the card right now if you want to see it. But yes, you know, not thinking that it would be a whole week that I wouldn't see Al, and I wouldn't see the other two students of my senior year class, two female students, and, you know, I wouldn't see my homeroom teacher, who was also my English teacher, getting me ready for the English Regents that school year. I wouldn't be able to go to my vocational program as part of school. I wouldn't see my job coach for a whole week. And of course, you know, being with senior privilege, you can say that. I even missed seeing the freshmen of the 2012-2013 class that I was a part of a whole week. So that was very dramatic experience that I couldn't go to school. I missed a whole week of senior year during Superstorm Sandy. And, you know, I'm glad that when we did go back to school on November 7th, we were allowed to at least talk to the vice principal at the time. And, you know, it was dramatic for all of us not being in the classroom for a whole week at that time. So 10 years later, I think about, you know, what I was grateful for, how I didn't lose power, but going out with my parents after the storm, there were so many downed trees in Fresh Meadows, it at least took about 2 to 3 days to get them off the road. And the real scary thing that I remembered from that experience, and there were two really scary things you could say that I remembered very well, was number one, and this is the important thing that I want to mention, that I recently had surgery a couple of weeks before Superstorm Sandy hit in Great Neck. It was to remove a cyst on my back at the time. And I remembered that as the surgery was getting done, everybody was talking about, oh, the big one's coming to New York. This is it. This is going to be historic, etc., etc. And, you know, I would have never had thought in a million years the Great Neck would lose power being so close to Queens. But I will mention, and this is the weirdest thing that happened during Sandy. Even though the power went out in Great Neck, it was the entire Great Neck community, and even my cousins at the time, before, I guess you could say my other first cousin on that side of the family, was born 3 years later in 2015. They also lost power too in their apartment. So everywhere Great Neck lost power, including the place where I got the surgery done in a medical building. I'm not going to say which one, but I was frantic on Wednesday. It was literally the 31st, and I remembered on that Wednesday, me and my mom were on the phone, and we were trying to literally find out online at the time. We were finding out, we had to Google what time was sunset on Monday, November 1st. That was the plan for my stitches to get removed. So that got taken care of. We had sunlight. And that was a very scary thing, to not have electricity. I mean, to think, this is a professional medical building. A few weeks ago, before Sandy, in my head I was thinking, this was a place that had 101.1 CBS FM playing, right? In the background, there was a fireplace even that was powered by the electricity. And now not having anything was a very scary thought. And I even remember at the time, I didn't even have a smartphone at the time. My first smartphone was a Samsung Galaxy 3 a year later, but at the time I had AT&T. And there was no cell phone service. And I had a phone that was capable of texting people in 2012, so I was in Queens texting everybody, letting them know that I was getting the stitches removed. And, you know, the weird thing was I get into Nassau County with my mom and dad. We're in the car. Okay, and just a year prior, we've had the '07 Lincoln now for a whole year. We got it in 2011. So we're on Community Drive, and you could barely get a cell phone call through. And my father even went further into Manhasset. King Cullen had no power down on Northern Boulevard at the time. And it was just a very scary thought that this whole drag stretch on Northern Boulevard in Nassau County had no electricity. So I remembered at the time there was still a bagel place in the shopping plaza on Little Neck Parkway and Horace Harding Expressway. We get into Queens on the way home, and believe it or not, there's electricity on the Queens side. So that was a very interesting thing that I do remember that we did go to Long Island the previous Saturday on October 27th. I don't remember at the moment, but the day before, I recollect watching a Giant game And I believe Kenny Albert was calling the game at the time. And he was mentioning on the air that we'd like to wish our viewers in New York safe regards dealing with Superstorm Sandy as it was approaching. And what I remember when Sandy did make landfall on that Monday, I was watching Monday Night Raw because at the time, Mr. Gersh told us that school was going to be closed on Monday and on Tuesday. It was already figured out at the time. So that was planned out. We had to wait until Tuesday. And at the time, we were told you might want to monitor Mike Bloomberg's briefings. And we're wondering, Mr. Gerst, aren't you the one who makes the decision at the time? And he's like, I'd rather wait to hear from the mayor of New York City first, because we're technically, even though we're still a private school, he wanted to follow up with Mayor Mike Bloomberg at the time. What do we do? Because I was saying, look, I want to go back to school as early as Friday. I wanted to go back, believe it or not, on November 2nd. I didn't want to wait until November 5th. Then, that Wednesday, the day before I had to go to Great Neck, Mike Bloomberg says, oh, there'll be no school on November 1st and the 2nd. And I'm like, really? So I wanted to go back to school on Friday. I was ready to go back on that Friday. But we had to wait until Monday, which was November 5th. And thankfully, I do recall that we had a snow day on Friday, November 9th. And the scary thing about that was, it was snowing. Actually, no, it was November 7th and the 8th. My bad. So it was a Thursday. And I remember we had no school either. And it was a pretty decent snowstorm we got. I think we had about 8 inches of snow in Queens on that Thursday. On my 17th birthday. And, the other thing I remember, I think this was November 3rd or the 10th. I remembered I wanted to go to Target for my birthday in Levittown, right? I went to a restaurant on Hempstead Turnpike. And I remembered calling the restaurant on that Friday to confirm that, they're open, yes, so they were open. And I remembered very well that the gas stations were just getting their electricity back. And the lines to get gas, I remembered this was the Exxon gas station on Newbridge Road and Hempstead Turnpike. I remembered, it was, the lines were just completely back around. They were all the way to the MGM shoe store. So that was the second traumatizing thing I remembered. And at the time, Andrew Cuomo, the governor, thought it was a good idea to do a gas rationing system that was used in the 1970s, where every day it would be odd letters, even letters for license plates. And that lasted for a while, and then the gas came back around after Thanksgiving. And I also remembered watching Mike Francesa on the time at Yes Network, and he was getting upset that, Staten Island got destroyed. There's no way you can run the marathon. Why would you want to make the runners go through a dangerous course going to the Verrazano Bridge, etc., etc.? And, I was starting to agree with Mike Francesa. And I remember the marathon got canceled. And I remembered also the Brooklyn Nets were just starting their franchise. They just made the move from New Jersey to Brooklyn. And I remembered that Barclays Center, this was supposed to be the first official event between the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks. And I was disappointed that that got canceled. Well, not canceled, it got rescheduled to a later date, but yeah, it was crazy what happened. And when I went to Long Beach a year later with my parents, later on in the summer of 2013, I remembered seeing a whole new different boardwalk, which to this day, almost 10 years later after the boardwalk got rebuilt, it's a sign of how far we've come since Sandy. And the one negative that I will admit, so far to this day, the people of Long Island really have not realized that their grid is one of the worst in the whole country. There was a storm that came a couple of years ago, Isaias, back in 2020, and a lot of people in Long Island lost their power. And I've said for a while that Long Island really needs to reinvest in modernizing the electric grid. Because in New York City, for whatever reason here in Fresh Meadows, we invested into it and look what happened. Not once did we lose power. I was afraid that the grid was going to go out. Thankfully it didn't, but I really wish that Long Island would really reinvest into its power grid, make it stronger, because, it's 2022. I mean, how is the grid still vulnerable to another catastrophe? I hope we don't have to go through another bad storm like Sandy. But we do have to hope and pray that the lessons we've learned, and at least some people in Long Beach have learned the lesson, they've risen their houses over time, which makes sense. And the people of Long Beach have improved the sand dunes. I've seen the sand dunes, and I think they are capable of handling another storm surge. I think they're ready. But the power grid, I feel, is not. So, those are my memories of Superstorm Sandy. And it's just crazy to think that 10 years ago we were going through a very dramatic storm. And I think about what happened with Ian in Fort Myers, and it reminds me of what happened here. And that's why I want to mention that in the description below, if you want to help the victims of Hurricane Ian out, I recommend donating to the American Red Cross. They need your help to at least get the relief and support. People in Fort Myers are still rebuilding, and it's going to take a while, but I will mention one other thing. A classmate at the time lost his home, and he had to go to a hotel in Manhattan at the time with his family. And given that it took a while for the FEMA money to come in from Sandy, I still remember people years later complaining, oh, we never got reimbursed from FEMA, we never got, so and so. And, after Ida came to New York last year, this is why we got flood insurance. You got to realize that flood insurance is the most important thing you can have right now. You don't know if a big rainfall is going to come. So, very important to have flood insurance. You always got to be prepared. If you don't get help from FEMA, it's always good to pay for it, knowing that you're covered, and down the line, if FEMA, because sometimes FEMA's response can be slow, but it's good to have that. So to wrap up this video, Pine Power LI did a video about Sandy on the 5-year anniversary. And me and John have had those discussions in the past. And believe it or not, John was here in Fresh Meadows. He actually went to the Arby's, my normal Arby's that I go to here in Fresh Meadows. He actually went there, because the ones in Long Island were still closed at the time, because they didn't have electricity. So you can watch that, because John really had a hard time dealing with that storm when he was still living in Westbury. So yeah, that's pretty much gonna wrap everything up. You can share your experiences with Superstorm Sandy in the description below. And, just thinking about, again, how grateful I was to have power. I know Al, my best friend from high school, he had power where he was still living at the time in East New York. And, no, Brownsville. See, I always forget what neighborhood it is. Brownsville at the time, yes. So, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Thank you all very much for watching. And I'm glad that we've improved, but again, for my viewers in Long Island, just tell PSE&G to improve the grid. That's all I'm saying. So, that's it.